Bookcase TV is brought to you in part by La Marina Restaurant.
We've been trying to give you a nice overall insight of the literature landscape at the moment. So we went to study young adult fictions. We went to show you at the Thriller Fest all those thriller writers like David Morrell and Lee Child and many others. We went to a romance novel. We went to spiritual writers like Andy Cohen and Marcel Proust and many, many others. But today we're going to bring to you a different kind of writer, the Afro-American literature. Where is it in these days? So how come we don't hear too much from American writers? So we are going to try to investigate that. What about gays and lesbian writers? Where are they? Excuse me, sir. I'm not a manager or band manager or an impresario. No, this is not a song contest here. Can you stop playing? Please stop. All right, time out. Thank you. Time out. Okay, I have a show to do and an investigation to lead, and I'm going to investigate right on the edge. I'm going to find them. Sylvia, can you get me a cab, please? You work in Princeton?
Yes.
You teach
Creative writing
at the program there?
Yeah.
What's the quality of student these days?
Oh, they're always incredibly bright. It's the hardest school in America to get into. You know, every 10 years you have a brilliant student, which I have right now, a Chinese woman called Lillian Li, and I think she'll be famous in 5 years. Grant has already accepted her stories, and I found her an agent, everything. She's just so brilliant.
You seem to have done a lot of traveling.
I lived in France 16 years.
16 years. You've seen a lot of happening in history and in writing as well. And now we have all these gay marriages. What was it like for you now to be in 2012 and see what those changes compared to the time when you were writing your first novels?
Of course, a great many more civil liberties and homosexuality, which was almost never mentioned in the 50s when I was young. Now it's talked about all the time. Gays used to be known for being very cultured, and it was sort of like the ticket of admission to be gay was that you had to know something about opera, something about, now nothing, just the gym.
Why going abroad for you? Because I feel like you're part of this tradition of American writers, from Hemingway to Gertrude Stein to even Terry Southern, which would be younger to your generation, who felt they had to go to Paris.
I was probably the end of that.
Why was that necessary?
I'm a great admirer of French culture, and I always wanted to live there, but I never quite had the nerve to do it. I went to Rome instead on the mistaken idea that the Italians were friendlier than the French. I finally got up my nerve when I was 42 and I had a Guggenheim, and I thought I would just go for a year. In fact, I stayed 16 years.
What did you do there?
I was a journalist for Vogue, American Vogue magazine, and I would write about cultural events, a little bit about fashion.
Your fictional writing, which are some yet biographical, came from your experience of traveling. Do you feel like, this travel were like a necessity, like to investigate, to create the anecdote?
Not really, because I write very autobiographically, so whatever my experience was, I wanted to teach at the University of Texas, but to get a full professorship in Texas, you have to be approved of by the state legislature, and there was no chance that a notorious homosexual would be approved of by a very Baptist administration.
In the 80s, in the 90s, or now, you mean?
Even now.
Even now, okay. You wrote about the French, I call the French canon.
Yeah.
Biography of
Genet,
Proust and
Rimbaud.
Yeah. Your life has been different, but it has a lot of similarities in the topic chosen.
But in '87, my favorite editor said, "Do you know someone who could write a biography of Jean Genet?" I said, "You mean to say there isn't one except the Sartre book?"
Yes.
And he said, "No, there isn't one." And I said, "Well, I'd like to do it." But I had no idea it would take me so long. It took 7 years to do it.
Really?
Because he must be the most difficult literary writer to research because nobody even knew what town he was born in. Even his best friends didn't know. And then, and there was no way to find out.
And we still don't know.
We do know.
We do know. Okay.
He was from Aligny en Morvan.
Okay.
And one day, a friend of mine found a little newspaper in Paris called the Morvan Duo.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy had an article, Mon camarade de classe, Jean Genet. I went freaked out, and I went to the village and I interviewed 13 people who had known Genet. And they had a very different story from the one presented in Sartre's Saint-Genet, because he talks about how he was stoned and driven out of the village for being a thief. But people knew he was a filcher, a chapadeur.
And so that was 7 years process to write from the beginning to the end?
Yeah, because, you know, he had an extraordinary life. He grew up among peasants in the Morvan, and he ended up among the Black Panthers and the Palestinians. It's a trajectory that nobody could have predicted.
That's right. Proust's biography was also, must have been very consuming.
Ever since high school, I'd been reading Proust over and over again. And I knew quite a bit about him to begin with, so I only wrote a very short book. But I emphasized, in a way, the gay side of Proust, which nobody talks about. I mean that is, it's in a big biography like Tadier. But I was very criticized by the keepers of the flame for having mentioned that he was homosexual. Like, they think that
everyone knows about it.
No, but that's supposed to reduce his universal appeal. I'm working on an anthology about Cocteau now, working with a wonderful American poet called Michael Dickman, and we're translating together Cocteau's Planchon.
Okay. Fiction writes, you still write?
Yes. I had a novel out this year called Jack Holmes and His Friend, and it will be published soon in France.
Okay.
And I have a memoir about Paris, which I'm just finishing now. It's a real proper memoir of those 16 years I lived there and all the millions of people I met. It's very gossipy.
Your Farewell Symphony, that trilogy, is autobiographical.
Yeah.
You started as a young man and it's a growth.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at it now, which is about 15 years later since it was published, 97, I believe, how do you view your own journey?
When I started out, I thought that my life was very weird and completely atypical. And then I realized it was representative of gay men of my generation.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about AIDS, or SIDA.
Yeah.
What was your first encounter with it?
Larry Kramer, who's the president of ACT UP and who was one of the great gay AIDS militants, in 1981, which was the beginning of the crisis, he had a meeting in his apartment at 2 Fifth Avenue, and there was a doctor called Friedman Keene, who was a specialist in AIDS, which was then called GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency.
That's right, yeah, I remember that as a twisted name, yeah.
And there were about 70 of us that were in the living room, and he told us about this strange new disease that seemed to be spreading very rapidly, and he recommended we stop having sex.
But they knew already back then it was gay.
Well,
gay-related illness. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We didn't even know that it had a straight. I mean, now more women have it than men, more Africans have it than Americans, and so on. But that was all unknown at that time.
How long did it took for the gay community to actually absorb that as a reality?
I think maybe when Rock Hudson died in 1985, that really was internationally was the big event.
The next book for you, so you say you're doing Jean Cocteau and...
Well, no, I mean, my own, that's just an anthology.
Okay.
It's because Claude Arnault wrote a biography of Cocteau, and it's dedicated to me, and so I took that seriously. So that's why we're bringing out an anthology at the same time of a sampling of his major writings.
Do you mentor young gay writers?
I don't believe in mentoring. I hate mentoring.
You do?
I refuse to be a father figure to anybody. I mean, I don't. I think that I guess I learned that from Foucault, that he would get angry if people would say, "Will you be my mentor?" He hated that, and I understand it. But it's because evil people like Sartre did that. That was their. Yeah. You can help people. I mean, I have this year I taught to gay students, and I know almost all the young gay writers.
Yeah, do you think it's a good quality of writing?
Yes, I mean, there are great gay writers. I mean, like Alan Hollinghurst in England, I think is a brilliant writer and one of the best, maybe the best English writer.
In the States?
In the States, well, there's a lot of people. Michael Cunningham and wonderful women writers like Eileen Miles. There are hundreds of good gay and lesbian writers.
And you?
Well, maybe.
I'm going to have you removed. Yes, security? I have someone in my office who will not stop playing the guitar. It's not an emergency, so you won't do anything about it? The topic of the books, they are life of very challenged kids who go through tremendous personal ordeal. So it's always hard to separate the writer from the work.
It's not that hard if you choose to. You know what I mean? I think that there's a way in America where people just conflate the author with their subject, you know what I mean? And so,
absolutely.
You know, I mean, you know, people thought I was a obese, illiterate 16-year-old girl when they read Push, you know what I mean? Yeah. I choose hard subjects because I want to explore deep material, you know what I mean? I mean, I want to go to the depths of the human soul to see what my characters are made out of, you know what I mean? And I can't do that if they're riding around in Maseratis, you know what I mean? Or maybe I could, but I don't choose to.
So empowerment seems to be a big part of the work, even if it's not completely expressed in the rejuvenation, it's actually something in motion.
So it's not this big moment of empowerment.
It's not a big fun,
it's more like a knitting together of the broken psyche, you know, bit by bit by bit by bit, you know, like with Precious learning the letters of the alphabet. With Abdul, you know, this is over 10 years he studies dance. So it's not like, oh, you know, like it's not like exactly. It's really this process of hard work, a lot of doubt, a lot of pain. You know, what I think any, you know, person goes through who wants to become more than they already are.
But that takes a consciousness or an awareness. It's got to be a moment, even for characters, where you decide this is enough. I have to change myself.
There's a moment in the kid where he has an epiphany and he realizes, he said, this beat, this sound, this is my life. I'm going to do this. He has no idea how hard it's going to be for him to do it, you know what I mean?
If we knew, it would be different.
Most people, if they knew what it took to become an artist or something, they would stop, you know, they would stop immediately. And the same thing for Precious, you know, the acquisition of language is going to be a painful task for her, even though it's going to give her great joy.
Pregnancies, especially in Push, they are very detrimental factor of life. How did you come up with that story? And how do you manage to have someone who's been so damaged, or so beaten down by life and the spirits, who managed to actually to find herself?
Well, the story actually has a precedent in African American literature. There's a long tradition of African American women coming out from the beginnings of African American female literature, coming out of the slave narratives, of talking about these type of issues, because the condition of African American women would often be, you know, being impregnated by the slave master.
By the master,
you know what I mean? And then on and on and on and on. Precious is a contemporary urban hip-hop novel, you know, in a certain kind of way. A blues novel told from the inner city. As bizarre as the literature seems to some people, it is a part of a tradition.
Okay. How did you write the book itself?
Push or the Kid?
The Push.
Push was written over a period of around 3 years, because I wrote it in an MFA program, so a Master of Fine Arts program, and that program is around 2 years long, and so I went in the program in 93, came out in 95, and then 96, 97 the book is published. So over those 3 years, I had been teaching for 7 years, teaching literacy, teaching kids, teaching adults, men trying to get their GED so they could get in the police department. I was teaching women who couldn't read and write. I was teaching English as a second language to people who had just come to the country. And then when I started the MFA program, I stopped teaching. I wasn't teaching anymore. And so all the lives of all the young people and all the students were just kind of like swimming in my soul, wanting a way out. You know, they were saying like, write me, you know what I mean? So that's how it happened. I think I would not have written that book if I had kept teaching. I wanted to recreate the world and the people who I had in some ways lost forever in a certain kind of way, because I was moving on.
What prompted you to write the kid?
I wrote a book of poetry called Black Wings and Blind Angels, and that came out in 2000. And then I actually had started the kid in, maybe 97, and then I stopped writing it to finish this poetry book. I started teaching, just a lot of things. It was really on the back burner, but I never stopped working on it. I think I was writing under the shadow of the success of Push. And that was pressure, really a lot of pressure. I know a lot of people, it's no pressure, they get it right off. But I was frightened. I was afraid.
Afraid of what?
I was afraid,
failure?
Afraid of failure.
Yeah.
I was also afraid of not being true to myself. You know what I mean? I knew that I did not want to write the same book. I did not want to do the cookie cutter thing. And so I knew that I had a whole different story in me, you know what I mean? And I really wanted to tell this story, and I didn't want to turn it into kind of a redemption motif, you know, rags to riches or whatever. You know, I really wanted to tell a very unique and desperate and sad story. And I knew that I was going to have to fight to tell that story.
So let's talk about poetry and fiction, because they're different animals.
Yeah.
They're completely different animals.
Yeah, they're completely different
Where do you
animals.
feel yourself more flowing, or at ease, or neither, or both, or which one?
I feel like maybe with fiction you're riding a horse, but with poetry you're riding a tiger, you know what I mean? And you just have no control, no matter how much you practice, how much technique you have, you cannot really control that force in a certain kind of way. Whereas your story, you do start out with a plot, characters, and stuff like that. But I'm moving more and more toward fiction, because I think it's what I want to do. It's maybe it was always what I wanted to do. Maybe I just started training first as a poet because that's what I read a lot of poetry as a kid, but so fiction is the animal I want to work with now.
Well, the different animals, and one is more like sprinting, and one is more like a marathon runner.
Exactly.
Your influences, where were they? You talk about poetry. You used to read a lot of it when you were younger.
Langston Hughes, Shelley. I used to love Edgar Allan Poe. In Childhood's Hour. And I lived with a love that was more than a love. I love that kind of end rhyme he had. I read Shakespeare's sonnets, Paul Laurence Dunbar.
Okay.
When I was in my 20s, I discovered the Black Arts movement. So Sonia Sanchez, Jane Cortez, Amiri Baraka, this black poetry, Lucille Clifton, people like that.
Now we have a black president, and you're also a black writer.
Right.
How has that impacted the literature circle?
I don't know how it has impacted the literature circle. How it has impacted me as the individual writer is that it has once again changed my perspective on what America is and what America can be. When we look at the election of Obama in a country that once held human beings of his race as slaves, we're looking at a healing of a sort that I don't think you've seen in Europe. I mean, have any
Probably
of the
not,
people
no.
you colonized
No,
become
absolutely not.
prime
But-
minister or president?
Oh,
Step
no.
up, tell me about it.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this was no joke. This was a magnificent
I think it's
event. So those are my thoughts on
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
you've been, you don't want to be pigeonholed as a writer who believes in transformation, right to riches, but you love that theme of opportunities. I mean, you just said yourself, you love a theme of potential, of renewal or
Right.
change,
Yeah,
and
I do,
you know.
I do.
Okay, maybe
Okay.
can.
Okay, you got me.
No, I don't get you. I'm just refraining what you say.
Right.
So the next novel probably have something of that sort in it. Yeah.
I really have what I call like some raw material, like around
Okay.
90 pages, and I can't even call it a rough draft yet.
Thank you for being with
Okay,
us.
thank you.
I made you laugh at least. That's something. Life is a big journey back home. The good news is that I will be back next season. I will not be forced into retirement. Though if I were forced to retire, I wonder where I would go. Where would I go? Where would I go? Where would I go? Where would I go? I guess if I do retire, I would have more time to read. Because really, reading blows your mind. So for the last pick of the week of the season, we also decided to go with Writers on the Edge, and we start with a memoir, In the Pleasure Grove, Love and Death and Duran Duran by John Taylor. Most of you don't know who John Taylor is, but he was one of my heroes when I was a kid, and he played in a band called Duran Duran, so classic songs like Jump Into the Fire or Save a Prayer. Great bass playing like you actually don't hear anymore. This is an open heart surgery memoir because he exposed himself a great deal and talked about his life and the struggles with stardom and post-stardom and the family life, well, it's not a struggle, but she seemed to be a blessing for him. And you will learn everything about juicy couture. In the Pleasure Grove, Love and Death and Duran Duran by John Taylor. Since I was talking about John Taylor, let me tell you about John Entwistle. John Entwistle was one of the greatest bass players of all time. He played in a band called The Who. This is why I'm breaking on because the next book of the week, it's Who Am I by Pete Townsend. Pete Townsend, you must remember, it's a guy who plays a guitar with a windmill in his arms. And he talks about his life, obviously from the 60s, and becoming one of the biggest rock and roll bands in the 70s by writing opera like Tommy or Quadrophenia. It's also an open heart surgery memoir. You just talk about a great deal about his addiction with drugs and the chaos that was surrounding the rock and roll life of Keith Richards and Keith Moon and almost dying in the circumstances. This is my biggest hero on the rock and roll front, Pete Townsend. I've never met him, but I would love to. Who Am I? And the last book of the season for the pick of the week, it's a big book big book with a big sort of mulch sort of scream, but it's actually called Punk, and it was written by Johann Kuhlberger and John Savage, and it's a punk, the aesthetics. And you remember punk now is pretty much a fashion statement, but back then it was actually a social movement. This book in particular resonated to me because all my favorite bands from Sex Pistols and The Clash are included in this. Peter and the Test Tube Baby and so on and so on. From Joan Jett as well on the American side. This is full of collages and pictures and all the art related to the punk movement, and it's a fantastic read. Punk and Aesthetics, published by Rizzoli.
That's you, right there with the Statue of Liberty hat.
That's right, that's me.
It's a living. Cut.
Cutting.